Hi there, welcome back Greeks and welcome to CPU.
Good day, Greeks! Welcome once again to Greek 101, and here's Sir JV to discuss another lesson for today. We're now down to the last 6 modules for our lesson in Greek 101. So, are you ready to learn today? Very good. So, let's begin with our lesson today about the contract verbs. Last time, you have learned a lot of verbs, and somehow along the way, we have encountered a lot of difficulties and adjustments because some of the examples I've given you in the exercises are actually contract verbs, and they have a special kind of rule. So this morning we will discuss the contract verbs as well as what are the rules in contracting these verbs. So that is module 25. For knowledge and objectives, firstly, we'll learn some of the Greek vocabulary, particularly the contract verbs. We'll identify how contraction takes place and its vocabulary form. And we will be familiarized with the contract rules and verb models. So let's begin. Let's start with our vocabulary for today. The first word is deiluo. We have here the omicron ending. It means I show. Deiluo, I show. Next word, eulogeo, I bless. Eulogeo, I bless. Eucharisteo, Eucharisteo, I give thanks. We have zao, zao, I live. Zeteo, zeteo, I seek. Theaumai, theaumai, that's a defective verb. I see or notice. Kaleo, kaleo, I call. Laleo, laleo, I speak. Martureo, martureo, I bear witness. Horao, horao, I see or observe. Parakaleo, parakaleo, I urge or comfort. Peripateo, peripateo, I walk about or live. Pleiruo, pleiruo, I fulfill or complete. Poieo, poieo, I do make. Stauroo, stauroo, I crucify. Delay o, delay o, I make perfect or finish. Teireo, teireo, I keep. Timao, timao, I honor. Phaneroo, phaneroo, I reveal. Phileo, phileo, I love or like. Of course, it's from the phileos, which is love for friend or brother. Next is say, seifao. Seifao means I touch. Right? That's our vocabulary for today. Let's proceed to why contraction takes place. Contract verbs are a special class with stems ending in alpha, omicron, and epsilon, which are the contract vowels. Examples, timao, the stem ends in alpha, and we have phileo, the stem ends in epsilon, and deiluo, the stem ends in omicron. So we can see in these examples, the stem endings are in the vowels, particularly the alpha, the epsilon, and the omicron. Let's take a look at a summary. The present of the verb agapao. Agapao, we have the stem is agap plus the contract vowel, that is alpha. The connecting vowel is omicron, and the ending is man. So of here the contraction with the alpha and the omicron. When you contract them, it becomes omega. That's why it becomes agapomen. That's the present active indicative first person plural, we are loving. Let's take a look at the contract verb in the future. Agap is still the stem, alpha the contract vowel, with the sigma, the sign, tense sign consonant, and the men, that's the ending. It becomes agape somen. That's the future active indicative first person plural, which means we will love. As you can see, alpha plus sigma. Although it's not a vowel, but there's a construction there, contraction there. That's why we changed to alpha to eta. The same is true with our lesson last time. The example I gave you with katabino. It becomes katabe somai. Okay, so how to identify the vocabulary form? Contract verbs in the vocabulary list are in their uncontracted forms. These forms never occur in Greek New Testament. Unless you know which vowels contracted and work back to the lexical or vocabulary form, you'll not be able to identify the verb as you read the New Testament. For example, the form kalete is from kaleo. It's the result of epsilon plus epsilon becomes epsilon iota. Thus, you lengthen the vowel. Thus, you know, kale plus ete becomes kalete. That's a present active indicative second person plural of kaleo. So let's take a look at the principles of contraction. The following are reasons for vowel contraction in Greek. The first one, vowel contracting with a vowel. Two like vowels from the common long vowel form common long vowel. Example, alpha plus alpha is still alpha, but epsilon plus eta becomes eta. There's an exception with epsilon plus epsilon. That's why earlier in kaleo, it comes kalete. You lengthen the epsilon by adding the iota. And with regards to omicron plus omicron, you add the upsilon. You lengthen the omicron by adding the upsilon. It becomes O. An omicron sound vowel, which is omicron or omega, overcomes alpha, epsilon, or eta, whether in a first person or second position, and forms omega. So if you can see, omicron plus omega plus alpha, epsilon, or eta, in this case, it will be changed to omega, except for epsilon plus omicron becomes omicron epsilon O, and omicron epsilon is still the same. When alpha and epsilon or eta contract, the first vowel is retained and uses its long form. So alpha plus epsilon becomes alpha. Alpha plus eta becomes alpha. Epsilon plus alpha becomes eta. Next, vowel contracting with a diphthong. By the way, a diphthong are two vowels that sounds as one. The first vowel disappears before a diphthong beginning of the same vowel. Example, epsilon plus epsilon iota becomes epsilon iota, and omicron plus omicron epsilon becomes omicron epsilon or O. How about when a vowel comes before a diphthong, which does not begin with the same vowel? It is contracted with a diphthong's first vowel, and the diphthong's second vowel disappears, unless it is iota, in which case it becomes subscript. Therefore, alpha plus epsilon iota, it becomes alpha with iota subscript. So the first letter, epsilon, was dropped, and the iota was written below. Alpha plus omicron epsilon becomes omega, and epsilon plus omicron epsilon becomes omicron epsilon. There is exception in the case of omicron plus epsilon iota, it becomes oi, and omicron plus eta with a subscript, it still becomes oi, and epsilon plus omicron iota becomes oi. Okay, let's proceed to two other exceptions to this guideline. The present active infinitive of verbs ending with in alpha omega has an rather than an with iota subscript, and the present infinitive of verbs ending with omicron omega has own rather than oin. Okay, so patterns of contraction. The following chart show the regular contraction of vowels. As we have earlier, epsilon plus epsilon becomes epsilon iota. Alpha plus omicron becomes omega. And omicron plus omicron becomes omicron epsilon. Let's take a look at the Koine verb contractions table. So alpha plus alpha is still alpha. Alpha plus alpha with iota subscript or alpha iota or I becomes alpha with iota subscript. Alpha plus epsilon becomes alpha. Alpha plus A becomes alpha with iota subscript. Alpha plus eta becomes alpha. Alpha plus eta with iota subscript becomes alpha with iota subscript. Alpha plus omicron becomes omega. Alpha plus the diphthong oi becomes omega with iota subscript. Alpha plus the diphthong o becomes omega. Alpha plus omega becomes omega. Alpha plus omega with iota subscript retains as alpha, omega with iota subscript. Let's take a look at the contractions that happens to epsilon added by these vowels. Epsilon plus alpha becomes eta. Epsilon plus alpha, iota subscript, or I becomes eta with iota subscript. Epsilon plus epsilon becomes A, diphthong A. Epsilon plus diphthong A becomes diphthong A. Epsilon plus eta becomes eta. Epsilon plus eta with iota subscript, you retain the eta with iota subscript. Epsilon plus omicron becomes O. Epsilon plus oi becomes oi still. Epsilon plus O becomes O. Epsilon plus omega becomes omega. And epsilon plus omega with iota subscript retains as omega with iota subscript. Let's proceed to the omicron. The omicron, when contracted with alpha, it becomes omega. Omicron plus alpha with iota subscript or I becomes omega with iota subscript. Omicron plus epsilon becomes O. Omicron plus A becomes oi. Omicron plus eta becomes omega. Omicron plus eta with iota subscript becomes oi or omega with iota subscript. Omicron plus omicron becomes O. Omicron plus oi becomes oi. Omicron plus O becomes O. Omicron plus omega becomes omega. And omicron plus omega with iota subscript is omega with iota subscript. So there you have it. That's a table of how we contract verbs or with the vowel endings. Let's proceed to other contract rules. There's accent in contract verbs. 3 rules apply for accenting contracted verb forms. If either of the vowels had an accent before a contraction, the resulting form will have an accent. Example, we have timao. And timao, when you contract, no, alpha plus omega becomes omega. Therefore, it becomes timo with a circumflex accent. But etimaon becomes etimone. So the same thing happens. Alpha plus omicron becomes omega plus the ending me. If the accent originally appeared on the first of the two, the contracted form will have a circumflex. As we can see earlier, timao becomes timo. That's the circumflex there. And if the original accent originally appeared on the second of the two, the contracted form will have an acute. That's why you have timaometa becomes timometa. So the alpha plus omicron becomes omega. All verbs ending in alpha will be inflected like timao, stems ending in epsilon like phileo, and stems ending in omicron like deiloo. The present and imperfect active indicative of these verbs are listed in the contracted and uncontracted forms. Other forms of contract verbs are in the chart of the book. Let's take a look at the present active indicative of the verb timao. So timao in the first person, timao, we have alpha plus omega, it becomes omega with a circumflex. Second person is timae. So of course, alpha plus a becomes alpha with a iota subscript, becomes timas. Timae. As you can see, the same rules here. Tima with a iota subscript. Timaomen. Alpha plus omicron becomes omega. Timaete becomes timate. And timaosi becomes timosi. So there is the contraction. Let's read the contracted form. Present active indicative of timao. Begin. Timo, timas, tima, timomen, timate, timosi. Very good. So that is the present active indicative of timao. Let's try the word phileo. As you can see, epsilon plus omega becomes omega. Epsilon plus a becomes a. You drop the first epsilon. The same rule applied in the third person, singular. And then epsilon plus omicron, it lengthens, so it becomes O. And double epsilon becomes A. And epsilon plus O becomes O with the circumflex. So let's read the present active indicative contracted form of phileo. First person begin. Philo, philes, philae, philomen, philate, philosi. Very good. Let's proceed to the last example. We have deiluo. In the case of deiluo, we have the omicron ending. Omicron plus omega, it becomes omega in the first person singular. In the second person, omicron plus a becomes oi. The same rule applied in the third person. The plural, omicron plus omicron becomes o, diphthong o. Omicron plus epsilon is still o, and double omicron becomes, you drop the first omicron and becomes o. Let's read the contracted form of the present active indicative of deiluo. Begin. Deilo, deilois, deiloi, deilomen, deilote, and deilosi. Very good. So let's proceed to the imperfect active indicative. In this case, we have and since it is imperfect, we have the augment in the beginning. The first person of timao, alpha plus omicron becomes omega. Alpha plus epsilon becomes alpha. Alpha plus epsilon becomes alpha. In the plural, alpha plus omicron becomes omega. And alpha plus epsilon becomes alpha. And alpha plus omicron becomes omega. So etimaon becomes etimon. Etimaes becomes etimas. Etimae becomes etima. Etimaomen becomes etimomen. Etimaete, etimate, and etimaon becomes etimon. Let's read the imperfect active indicative of timao in its contracted form. Ready? Begin. Etimon, etimas, etima, etimomen, etimate, etimon. Very good. Let's try the word phileo. As you can see, epsilon plus omicron, you lengthen it into O, and double epsilon becomes A. That's in the same in the third person. And then epsilon plus omicron becomes O, double epsilon becomes A, and epsilon plus omicron becomes O. So ephileon becomes ephileon, ephilees becomes ephiles, ephilee becomes ephilae, ephileomen becomes ephilomen, ephileete becomes ephilate, and ephileon becomes ephileon. Let's read the imperfect active indicative of phileo in its contracted form. Ready? Begin. Ephileon, ephiles, ephilae, ephilomen, ephilate, ephileon. Very good. And the last, we have deiluo. In the case of deiluo, double omicron becomes O. Omicron plus epsilon becomes O still. Same in the third person. In the plural, Double omicron still O. Omicron epsilon becomes O, and double omicron becomes O. So adelon becomes adelone. Low S becomes adelos. Adelaide becomes adelo. Adeloomen becomes adelomen. Adeloete becomes adelote. And adeloon becomes adelon. Let's read the imperfect active indicative of loon in its contracted form. Again, adelone, adelos, adelo, adelomen, adelote, adelone. Very good. So that's how we contract the vowel stems with the vowel as well. And finally, we have the liquid verbs. Verbs of stem ends in a liquid consonant like labda, mi, ni, and ro are called liquid verbs. The future active and middle indicative and the future active and middle infinitive, these verbs drop the sigma and add epsilon and behave like contract verbs. Example, the future of crino is not crinso, but crino evolved from crineo. So these are also found in our book. So that's it for the liquid verbs. So again, the liquid verbs, when added with sigma, yeah, evolved to crineo. You add the epsilon there. So that's all for today. And I hope you have learned a lot in our lesson. And don't forget to answer our assignment also. We have the present active indicative of 3 examples. We have one in each letter. We have an alpha, epsilon, and omicron ending, and also in a perfect active indicative. That's all for today. Thank you, God bless, and see you on the next lesson. Great day, everyone.